Hi class, today we're going to start off with doing a single signature pamphlet stitch. I'm going to start off by doing the easiest way to do it, though there are ways to make it more complicated, of course. We're going to be using A4 paper as our pages and then this colored paper as our cover. So I need to cut a piece of this cover to be the same size as my paper. What will I need for this? Something to cut on. You guys have your boards to cut on, but I'm just using this magazine and my knife, and I'll need a bone folder. I'm gonna need thread and my needles as well. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is figure out which way my grain is on my paper. So this is something I haven't talked to you about yet, but paper has a grain. It's the way the fibers line up. It either goes this way or it goes this way. It's kind of impossible to tell by looking at a piece of paper, but there's a test to do. You try to fold it and see which way is more easy. So you fold like that, that's pretty easy. Try to fold like this and it resists. So that means I know the grain goes this way. So when I make my book, this is basically a pamphlet stitch itself, right? It's going to be folding on this edge, right? So you want to make sure that the book is going to go this way is the spine, and then here is one cover, here's the other cover. Now what about this paper? It's also, the grain is this way. So to make a book, you actually really want to go this way instead of this way. So this is just something to plan ahead. The paper I gave you is really big. So you want to test which way is the grain and then make sure you can fit the pages how you want to cut them out from that paper. But for this little test book, I can tell this is the grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fold them this way and then cut them so they're not so long. So just like before, you want to make sure that the corners are lined up pretty exact. Move this out of the way. Now, to be honest, computer paper folds pretty easily both ways because it's so thin, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if you did it the other way, especially for like a test book, it's okay. But for the final book, when you're going to use nice thick paper, because you don't want to use this paper, right? You want to use some of the nice paper I gave you, then it actually matters a lot more. So the correct way to do this is one at a time, not all together. And the reason for that is it's really hard if you do them all together to actually have everything line up properly. Like the one in the middle usually gets really off. So we're going to do 4 pages, actually. Now, I'm going to trim them down to the size that I want. Just go slow. It might take 3, 4, 5, 6 cuts to get through all of them. Don't rush it. Don't press too hard. That's the best way to get a nice even edge. Okay. Now I'm going to place them inside each other one by one. Now, as you can see, the papers in the middle, they get pushed out the furthest, so this edge is no longer even. Even if you cut it perfectly even, it's called page creep. The ones in the middle are gonna creep out, but that's okay. At the very end, we're gonna trim it so that it actually lines up perfectly. Now we need our cover. So remember, this is the way of the grain. So we want to cut it like this, so it's gonna fold on this edge. I'm gonna use this one as the guide. Again, take your time. I'm gonna check. Okay, I think I need. Let's see. There we go. Okay, just like the pages. Here's the pages, those are the scraps. We fold it in half. And do a really nice job getting it. Nice sharp edge. So as you can see, it is sticking out on this edge, but after we're done sewing it, we're gonna trim it off so that it's nice and neat. So now we're gonna start the sewing process. There are lots of different stitches you can do. There's 3-hole, 2-hole, 5-hole, lots of different numbers of holes. The easiest is a 3-hole one. So we'll start with that, just to make it simple. The way you can think about that is there are 4 divisions, right? So you can divide it in half and then into quarters, and then you have 1, 2, 3 holes, right? So you want to grab a ruler. Okay, so you want to take your ruler. Divide it into 4 sections, right? So half and then quarters. This means there's gonna be 3 holes. Something that can be helpful at this stage is to clip your book. You do have some kind of, it's just like a chip clip. If you have some kind of binder clip or paper clips, if you don't have one, it's optional, but it might make your life a little easier. Up. Like that, and it doesn't move as much. So now we're going to use our awl, this guy. So now we're going to use our awl to poke holes . You want to make sure it actually goes through, so it might take a few times. Okay, we have to go through and make the hole a little bigger. You see, I poked through to make the second hole bigger, but if I hadn't done that, that's what that one looks like. So you might like a smaller hole so the hole doesn't show as much. That one didn't go through at all, so we have to keep going a little more. You want to do this over your green board or some kind of surface. If you do it right over your table, you're going to poke little holes onto your table. All right, went through. Great, so now we are ready to sew. Okay, now it's time to cut our thread, but how long should I cut it? Because if you cut it too short, you'll have to add more to it, and it's not fun, right? So we don't want to cut too much either, because then you're gonna run out of thread. So the basic rule of thumb for this is 3 times the length of the spine. So that's from here to here. So here's 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now it's time to sew. So we have to thread our needle. Okay, this book here has a really good diagram how to do that. So we'll leave this right here to help us. So we're going to start on the outside, going through the middle hole. You start on the outside, and then you leave a little tail stick out for tying at the end. Then you can go to either hole, doesn't matter. Go back through like that. Then you're gonna go back through this hole, but you wanna make sure that you don't go right into the thread, because you could like break the thread and have it like tie to itself. You really don't want to do that. So you wanna stay separate from the other thread. Okay, now it goes through this hole. And look at that. The first thread is waiting there to tie together. So to do this, we're gonna tie it like this. And we're gonna do what's called a box knot, where you go over, under, under, over. So you switch off which thread's on top. So right now, this thread's gonna be on the bottom. And now it's gonna be on the top. Just tie a knot like that. Take your scissors, cut it, unclip. And there you have very basic single signature pamphlet book. We are now going to trim this edge because it does look a little bit janky to have that edge over there. So we're going to line it up with the edge of the cover. That's the easiest way to do it. Make sure you take your time lengthening it. Just make sure it's right, okay? And again, just take your time with your cuts. You're gonna kind of come off one at a time. Pull off any kind of loose edges there. So now we have an even cover, 3-hole, single signature pamphlet book. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to do another stitch and a different kind of back. Instead of like a very sharp edge spine, it's gonna be more like a square. But I'm gonna hold off on showing you how to do hard covers until the next time. Okay, so for this next book, I cut myself some pages just the way I did before, and a piece for a cover. Again, making sure that it's on the right side of the grain. Okay, so now I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm gonna clip this on with a little bit showing, so you can see what I'm doing. Instead of making like a one line, I'm making like a little square spine, and I want it to be about 1 centimeter wide. Marking using that as a center, right? Where I want those to be, and then I'm gonna do the same thing for the other side. So, see, there's the middle, but then that is centimeter. So centimeter wide up here, centimeter wide there. So now you're gonna take your straight edge. So you guys will be your ruler. And you're actually gonna score it. So you're not cutting this time. You're using the bone folder to make like a fold. See that? So that's a score. Let's do it the other time. On the other side. One, two. Okay, and then we can kind of fold on the lines. Like that. So we get this kind of spine instead of the other book. Here it is. Instead of the other book, which is more like a line, this is more of a rectangular spine. Okay. Now we put our pages back in. Let's get it centered. So I have access to the middle. Okay, so now we're ready to start putting in our holes for our stitch. So for this one, I'm going to do a 5-hole stitch. So I have that in this book here. So for this one, it's gonna get 6 sections, right? So we have 5 holes, but 6 sections. So again, we're gonna measure it out. So that's the middle, and then we have to divide this into 3s, right? So we have 2 holes on each side of that. So I have it at 7 centimeters, and let's think about this for a second. 7 divided by 3 is 2 1/3. So then it would be 4 2/3. So it would be 9 1/3. 11 2/3. There we go. Okay. I'm showing you a very simple stitch, but there are some much more like fun, complicated, interesting stitches that you can do instead, and I'm also including a video on how to do those. But this is if you want to keep it a little bit more complicated than this one, but not that complicated. This is like intermediate. Okay, so see we have the 5 holes coming out the back. Even though it's more holes, it's still the same length of thread. You want 3 times. 2. This one's a little bit more complicated. I'm going to follow along on this diagram. Okay, so we have our thread. And once again, we are going to start on the outside so that you can tie it there. So through the middle hole, you pretty much always start in the middle hole. On the inside, you're gonna pick either this hole or this hole. Pull it tight. You want to make sure you keep pulling it tight. It's really not attractive when it's all loose and the book is like sliding everywhere. So make sure it's good and tight, but not too tight. You don't want it to feel like it's getting stressed or that the thread could break. So you want it tight, but not too tight. Okay, so then you're out here and go back in through. All right. Now you come back to this hole, taking care not to stab the thread. And then you skip the middle hole and go through this hole here. So as you can see, there's like thread there. Now out to this other edge hole, back in through there, taking care not to stab the thread, pulling it tight, then go back through the middle hole, and then you tie it. Now make sure you have one thread on one side of this and the other thread on the other side. That way when they tie it, they capture this thread. It's better than if they're both on the same side, then this thread will be loose, and we don't want that. So if you want, you can always go back through and kind of like pull, you know, the threads tight. But that looks pretty good to me. Let's see. This one could be maybe a little tighter. So we'll just kind of pull it. There we go. Now it's nice and tight. So you can take off your needle. And once again, we're gonna do the box knot. So the shorter one's gonna be under the longer thread first. And now the shorter one's gonna be over the longer thread. So it gets a really good. Okay, so this is also something you could do if you want, is you could put like beads on this. You could use yarn, you could use colorful thread, you could dye the thread if you don't want it to be white, so that it gives it more of a fun look. I'm just gonna cut mine. Okay, unclip it. So then you kind of want to get your edge back. Okay, that's kind of a satisfying view in there. However, look at that. We don't like that. Like that. Get this out of the way. So now you're gonna get that nice edge, and then I can look on the other side and I see that actually the green covers aren't even. That's the issue, right? But that's okay, we just trim it from the other side. So there's no worries. Still stuck, so that means something hasn't been cut through. There we go. Okay, now that edge is nice and even. So you can kind of get this a little bit more structure. So those are two different kinds of single pamphlet books to give you a completely different type of looks for your cover. And then next class, I will show you guys double pamphlet stitch and also hard covers.